The movie opens with a boy working at a convenience store where a group of children start bullying him, making him feel nervous and uneasy. Shelley arrives and tells Jacob she can drive him to his grandpa's house since he is planning to visit him, but his grandpa warns Jacob not to come. Jacob assumes his grandpa must be sick, and that is why he is speaking this way. Later that night, when they reach the grandpa's house, Jacob notices something feels off. As he steps inside and looks around, his grandpa is nowhere to be found, and the place is in complete disarray. Shelley remains nearby and asks Jacob if he needs anything. Jacob looks behind and notices a broken railing. He follows the railing toward the forest, and there he sees his grandfather lying unconscious. He quickly calls the police and says they need help. Just then, his grandfather grabs his hand and tells him that he must leave this place. He says that tomorrow on the island, he will have to enter the circle and that he must go to September 3rd, 1943. Jacob's grandfather says that Jacob always thought he was crazy, but on the island, he will find a bird that will explain everything. He makes Jacob promise that he will go there and listen to him. Jacob promises, and right after that, his grandfather dies. At that moment, Shelley appears. When Jacob looks behind her, he sees a huge creature. She turns around and fires several bullets, but there is nothing there, as only Jacob can see that creature. A month passes, and Jacob's mental state is still unstable, so he goes to a therapist for help. He tells the psychiatrist about his childhood and the stories his grandfather used to share with him. One of those stories is about a place in Ireland where many children live, and each child has a different kind of power. His grandfather used to tell him as a boy that this place was a kind of school on the island, and its principal was a woman named Peregrine, and she also had the ability to turn into a bird. Young Jacob once asked his grandfather why he was sent to Ireland. His grandfather explains that during World War II, Poland was not safe at all, and because he was a peculiar being, his life was in danger. To protect him, he was sent to Ireland, which was a magical island. Jacob loves listening to his grandfather's stories and believes them when he is a child, but as he grows older and tells these stories to his school friends, they laugh at him. No one believes the stories, and slowly Jacob himself starts doubting them. His grandfather insists that he has never lied to him. The scene shifts back to the present. Jacob leaves his grandfather's house and goes to stay with his mother and his father. His aunt gives him a book that once belonged to his late grandfather. Inside the book, he finds a postcard that is 2 years old, sent by Miss Peregrine from the island in Ireland that his grandfather often spoke about. The postcard mentions that she and the children miss him greatly and hope he will visit soon. With the postcard in hand, Jacob visits his psychiatrist along with his parents. He believes that traveling to the island might help him understand what his grandfather had been trying to tell him. The psychiatrist supports the idea, explaining that visiting the island could help him uncover the truth and distinguish between his imagination and reality, which might improve his mental health. Jacob's father agrees to take him on the trip, as he is working on a book about birds and expects to gather valuable material there. Jacob and his father set out for Ireland. During the journey, Jacob notices a bird flying above them. His grandfather points it out, comparing it to the stories he once told about Miss Peregrine, the principal who could transform into a falcon. Jacob, however, now treats it only as a light remark rather than something to believe. They arrive at the island, and Jacob reaches the children's home that his grandfather had told him stories about since his childhood. He sees that the place is now in complete ruins. It had been destroyed entirely by Germany. Disheartened, he returns, but the next day he goes back. When he steps inside the ruins and enters the children's home, he feels as if someone else is around him. He then notices a figure in front of him calling his name. Afraid, he tries to run away but falls and loses consciousness. He regains consciousness to find a group of children standing before him. Unsure if they are real or something supernatural, he tries to make sense of what he's seeing. They assure him no one is dead and explain that Miss Peregrine had already anticipated his arrival. Before he can ask more, they begin leading him toward what they call a time loop. Overwhelmed and skeptical, Jacob runs back to his father, struggling to trust anything he's just experienced. But it becomes clear he's not in his own era at all. He slipped into 1943 when the place he's standing in was still a bar instead of the hotel he knows. The locals, unfamiliar with him, confront him aggressively, and things quickly turn dangerous. Just in time, the peculiar children arrive, drive off the threat, and burn the bar before taking Jacob away. Shocked by the destruction, Jacob wonders if he was the one who caused it, but an unseen voice corrects him. It was the invisible boy, who can only be noticed when wearing clothes. The group escorts Jacob to their home. To his surprise, the building he had earlier seen in ruins now stands intact, surrounded by lush greenery. Inside, he meets Miss Peregrine, who welcomes him warmly. Slowly, Jacob begins to believe that the fantastical stories he once heard from his grandfather might be real. She introduces him to the rest of the children, each gifted with extraordinary abilities. Among the children is the girl named Emma, who can control the wind and float in the air. She had once been in love with Abraham, Jacob's grandfather, but after he left this place, their connection faded. Over time, he stopped responding to her letters, having married someone else, and her heart was broken. Still, she treats Jacob with kindness. There is also a boy named Enoch who has the rare power to bring the dead back to life. He holds a grudge against Jacob because his grandfather had abandoned this home long ago. And for that reason, Enoch doesn't want Jacob to stay. That evening, they all sit down for dinner together. Afterward, as Jacob prepares to return to his own world, one of the children suggests showing him something remarkable: how they live the same day over and over again. They gather in a clearing and cover their faces with protective masks. Above them, several planes cross the sky. Suddenly, one aircraft veers toward their location and drops a bomb. This is World War II, and such events are all too common. But before the explosive can strike their home, Miss Peregrine takes out her special pocket watch, halts time, and reverses it. In an instant, the day begins anew. Jacob realizes they live within a time loop, endlessly repeating September 3rd, 1943. This is why none of them ever age. Even though the outside world continues to move forward, Jacob slowly began to understand that two timelines existed side by side. One was the present from which he had come, and the other was a loop in which the same single day kept repeating endlessly. This loop had been running since September 3rd, 1943, and within it, everyone remained exactly the same age they had been on that date. The caretaker of this loop was Miss Peregrine, who belonged to a rare group called Imbrines. Imbrines had the extraordinary ability to transform into birds and, more importantly, to reset a single day over and over. Thanks to her powers, the children had been living the same day since 1943 without aging, safe from the dangers of the outside world. Eventually, Jacob returned to his own time, 2016. To do this, he had to pass through a cave that acted as a portal between the two worlds. The same cave allowed him to go back to 1943 whenever he wanted, making it the only path between timelines. Back in his time, Jacob secretly carried with him a letter he had found at Miss Peregrine's place. It was addressed to her from his grandfather, and curiosity pushed him to read it. In the letter, his grandfather wrote that he had learned about Mr. Barron's men being spotted in England, near another time loop run by Miss Avocet. Just like Miss Peregrine's loop, this one also preserved a single day in 1943. His grandfather warned her to be cautious, to have the number of people in danger, and to create a new time loop in a safer location. The next day, Jacob returned to 1943 with the letter and showed it to Miss Peregrine. He told her that if his grandfather had any connection to such dangerous people, he would have to inform the police, especially because his grandfather had been murdered. Miss Peregrine did not know about this murder, and though she remained silent, she chose not to explain anything further. Later, Jacob went to Emma, who offered to take him somewhere important. She led him to a place where Miss Peregrine was preparing to face a massive creature, a monster. Because the day in the loop repeated endlessly, they knew exactly when and where the creature would appear. Jacob watched in awe as Miss Peregrine confronted the beast and successfully killed it, ending a threat that had been haunting their hidden world. Emma looked at Jacob intently and asked if he could truly see the monster. When he confirmed it, she explained that no one else could, only he possessed that ability. It was the same rare gift his grandfather had carried. Jacob, still in disbelief, insisted that he was nothing special, just an ordinary human. But Emma calmly told him that if he were truly ordinary, he could never have entered the time loop in the first place, because no common person could cross its boundaries. Later, Miss Peregrine herself spoke to Jacob, revealing that from the moment he was born, she had known he carried a special gift. His grandfather had known too, but had chosen not to tell him until his 18th birthday. They had both wanted him to have a normal childhood, free from the burdens of knowing such things. Miss Peregrine then showed him a book explaining that it was their history. Long ago, there had been certain individuals among them who lived so long inside time loops that they began to wonder if they could achieve immortality outside of one. They believed that with Imbrine's powers, they could live forever, even without the safety of a loop. Among these seekers of forbidden power was a man named Mr. Baron. Along with his followers, he captured Imbrine, intending to exploit her abilities for their own gain. They attempted a dangerous experiment, hoping to secure eternal life. But the result was catastrophic. The experiment transformed them all into invisible, hideous monsters. Years later, they finally discovered a possible way to undo the effects. They learned that the answer lay within children who possessed special abilities. The truth Jacob learned was grim. If those monsters consumed the eyes of children with special abilities, they could regain their humanity and become normal again. This was why Baron, along with his followers, had attacked multiple time loops, hunting down such gifted children and devouring their eyes. Baron himself had succeeded once, managing to transform back into human form, but his mission was far from over. He continued raiding loops, determined to help his remaining monstrous companions return to human form as well. Just as Miss Peregrine maintained her own time loop, there were many other Imbrines across the world, each safeguarding their own loop and the children within it. One such Imbrine, named Miss Avocet, arrived at Miss Peregrine's loop in distress. She revealed that her own time loop had been discovered by those who hunted children. There were too many for her to fight alone, and she had been forced to flee to save her life. Miss Peregrine tried to reassure her, telling her that she was safe now, but Miss Avocet shook her head. No one was truly safe. The attackers had planted a tracking device on her loop, meaning it was only a matter of time before they found this one too. Their goal was to repeat the same experiment that had turned them into hologast in the first place, but this time they intended to use even more Imbrines to amplify its power. Realizing the danger, Miss Peregrine declared that they had no choice but to abandon the loop. Preparations for evacuation began immediately. However, Jacob did not go with them. Instead, he returned to his own time. When he arrived back in his present day, he was met with a chilling sight. Another man had been killed in exactly the same way his grandfather had been murdered. And then he saw and immediately understood. The hologasts, the invisible monsters, had already made their way into his time. Determined to warn Miss Peregrine, he hurried toward her, but someone was following him. It was a man who had just arrived in town that very day. Jacob noticed the stranger slipping into the cave that led to the time loop. That was when it hit him. This man couldn't be an ordinary human. Jacob confronted him, asking if he was also peculiar. The man smiled and confirmed that he was, revealing that he had been following Jacob for quite some time. But then, in an instant, the man's appearance began to shift. His true identity emerged. Jacob's own psychiatrist was none other than Baron himself. Before Jacob could react, Baron captured him and dragged him to Miss Peregrine. Standing before her, Baron issued his threat. She must surrender herself to him, or Jacob would die. Miss Peregrine's heart sank. Jacob's life was too important. After all, he was the only one who could see hologasts. That ability made him invaluable. With no other choice, she prepared to give herself up to Baron. But before doing so, she turned to Jacob and told him with solemn urgency that the lives and safety of all the children would now rest in his hands. Miss Peregrine, now trapped in her bird form, was locked inside a cage. The other Imbrine present tried to gather all the children into one room, but she too was soon captured by a hologast. The invisible creature dragged her away, leaving no chance for escape. Despite the chaos, the children managed to flee the house. Outside, the scene shifted to a moment from the Second World War. Bombs rained down from the sky. This time the day had not been reset, so the bomb fell directly onto their home. The explosion destroyed the hologast along with part of the building, but it also left their home in ruins. Now, homeless and desperate, the children were determined to rescue Miss Peregrine at any cost. They hurried to the seashore, only to find that their enemies had already left. But the group knew where they had gone. Emma used her powers to raise a sunken ship from the depths of the water. The vessel, eerie and filled with skeletal remains, emerged from the waves. The children climbed aboard and sailed toward their destination, Blackpool, the place where Miss Peregrine was being held prisoner. Once they arrived, they quickly located the building where the experiments were about to be conducted. Emma confronted Baron and his followers, her voice steady with defiance. She demanded that they release Miss Peregrine and every other Imbrine bird they had captured, warning them that if they refused, they would face consequences they couldn't imagine. She reminded Baron of the last time they had destroyed his hologast, hinting that they could do it again, and worse. Baron grew furious at Emma's warning. In his rage, he unleashed his hologast along with his remaining allies to hunt down the children. Although the creatures were invisible to everyone else, Jacob could see them clearly. With Jacob's guidance, the boy with the power to reanimate the dead brought the ship's skeletal remains to life. The resurrected skeletons charged into battle, tearing through the hologast. Thanks to the ice storm conjured earlier, the invisible monsters became partially visible, making it easier for the children to target and destroy them. Once the hologast were defeated, the group made their way to the location where Miss Peregrine and the other Imbrines were being held. Using their abilities, the children fought fiercely, eliminating Baron's guards. Enoch, driven by determination, reached the Imbrines first, working to free them before Baron could intervene. But Baron arrived just in time to block their escape. Jacob acted quickly, unlocking the final restraints and freeing all the captured Imbrines. Miss Peregrine, now restored, attacked Baron before leading the group out. The other children soon caught up, only to be met with a disturbing sight. There were now two Jacobs standing before them. Baron had shape-shifted into Jacob's form, leaving everyone confused about who the real one was. Then, from behind, a hologast appeared, charging toward the group. Jacob spotted it immediately, while Baron, disguised as Jacob, remained unaware, lacking the ability to see the creatures. Jacob used the moment to prove who was real. As the hologast lunged, it seized Baron Baron, recognizing him as the imposter. Before Baron could react, the monster ripped out his eyes, killing him instantly. Jacob then swiftly killed the hologuest, ending the threat. With Baron gone, the children prepared to escape. They needed to return to their own time quickly, otherwise their bodies would begin to age rapidly and they would die. All of them had traveled from 1943 to 2016, only to rescue Miss Peregrine and the other Imbranes from Baron's clutches, as he had brought them into this era for his experiments. Now they had to make the journey back. Emma announced that everyone would return to 1943, but she asked Jacob to stay behind. In this timeline, Jacob's grandfather was still alive, because the day Baron had originally killed him had now been erased. Baron no longer existed to commit the act. Jacob embraced Emma, their bond deepened by everything they had been through. She and the rest of the children stepped into the loop and vanished, returning to their time. Jacob went home where he found his grandfather alive and well. Overcome with emotion, he hugged him tightly. His grandfather, however, reminded him that Emma was still waiting. Handing Jacob a large sum of money, he revealed a map showing every time loop in the world. Knowledge that would allow Jacob to navigate back to her. Determined, Jacob traveled through multiple loops, eventually reaching the year 1942. There, he enlisted in the Navy and patiently waited an entire year. Finally, in 1943, he arrived on the exact day Emma and the other children were set to travel back by ship. He found her, and the two embraced, knowing they could now be together. Because the 1943 loop was never restarted, Jacob could not simply step back into it directly. Instead, he had to journey through different loops to reach 1942, and only after waiting could he reunite with Emma. He knew this was the very ship she had taken from 2016 to 1943, completing the circle of their adventure.